Welcome everyone to the second to last of our series in the AI for SDGs campaign. Today we'll be covering SDGs 14 and 15, life below water and life on land. We'll wait for just one more minute before everyone kind of joins in and settles. And while we do so, I'm gonna make sure everyone's good. Again, thanking everyone for taking their time out of their day, especially our speakers, for this amazing panel on life above land and below water, flora and fauna, focusing on animals and vegetation particularly. And we have a great group of people, actually very relevant to the line of work that all of our panelists are kind of doing, starting from the very tech-heavy side of things here, working on a flora-fauna database, a universal sort of database to navigate through the intricacies of animals and plants, so to say. And on the other side of things with Ben, you've been working on your video production org and helping kind of raise awareness on multiple different SDGs, including 14 and 15, that are also very relevant to particularly your org tomorrow and focus. Without further ado, I feel like everyone's kind of settled. Let's get started. Okay, Frank, you're right there on the side of my screen. Please feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit. The floor is yours.
Hi, my name's Frank Barbano. I'm a recent Penn State alumni, and I'm one of the co-founders of Project Green Thumb, along with Nathan Leo.
I'll go next.
You want to go ahead? Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Nathan Leo. I am a current graduate student here at Penn State, doing my PhD. I specialize a lot in artificial intelligence and work a lot on the tech side, heavy things of Project Green Thumb. With Frank.
Cool. Yeah, I can go next. Hey guys, I'm Benedict. I just finished my undergrad at Vanderbilt like I think 3 weeks ago. I started a nonprofit while I was there called Tomorrow in Focus, and essentially what we try and do is use AI video production and tools to make storytelling more accessible for NGOs, UN agencies, and the like. And I'm also doing an internship right now with the G20 Global Land Initiative.
Lovely to hear. And Global Land Initiative would love to dive deeper in. If anything, this pertains really well with our topic of discussion today. And familiar faces here, our panelists today are returning speakers from past as AI for SDG series panels that we've had. So lovely to have all of us back here. Jumping back into Project Green Thumb with Nathan and Frank. Frank or Nate, either one of you, please take a shot at this. We'd love to know a little more about Project Green Thumb for those of us who are unfamiliar with your work. A little bit about how the project started. What is it that you guys do? What are some of the impacts that you guys have had?
I'll let Nate take it away this time to start.
So here at Project Green Thumb, our current mission is to collect all of the different species in the whole entire world, and everything from plants to animals to fish, and to understand these relationships between these different species and how they can relate to one another and how they complement each other. And Frank could really dive more into the specifications of that realm. But for the tech heavy side, our current production is getting up this database of all these peer-reviewed data of over 1 million species we have currently collected, again, across all these different kingdoms. And we're right now trying to analyze the data that we have to see how we could relate this data to create ecosystems that are sustainable for us humans to actually live and thrive in, and to actually better the world in general. Go ahead, Frank. You could dive more into.
So our aim is to utilize this data to create educational tools using AI, so the average person can dive in on our app or our website and learn all there is to know about how the ecosystem around them is interconnected with not only their lives, but how the different species are interconnected as well. So once we get a database of all these plants and animals and insects and how they interconnect, you'll be able to use our tool to scan your yard, make a 3D map, and then have it intelligently design landscapes for you that are not only aesthetically pleasing, but also serve the ecosystem around you as well, specifically tailored to your ecoregion.
Yeah, and one more thing to add on to that, it's not just limited to yards, your backyard. It could be for, rivers or restoration projects at a bigger scale as well.
Thank you, Frank and Nate. Ben, a little bit about Tomorrow in Focus. I know we've heard this time and time again, but hey, it doesn't get old. For those of us who are not familiar with Tomorrow in Focus, let's hear a little bit about you guys and how you started and how it came about.
Yeah, and Frank, Nate, that sounds awesome. It's really cool to hear what you guys are working on. Totally goes way over my head on the technical and more like ecological side, but excited to hear more. Yeah, Tomorrow in Focus kind of came out of me, and just a whole bunch of Andy students who I have more of a background in filmmaking, as well as a whole bunch of people that are a ton smarter than I am, are more on the kind of technical side with it. Um, and we really got our start because because within the UNCCD, which is the kind of desertification end, which relates to a lot of the land conversations that I'm sure we'll be having today, within the United Nations, a director within it was really frustrated with the kind of state of the UN, just kind of in his niche and where he was. And he was like, guys, we're so behind on tech. We're so behind on bringing innovation into the United Nations and innovation for impact. And so big solution to that was obviously let's make a movie about it because that saves the world. But less jokingly, I think there's a lot to be said about communications and storytelling. And so he said, I want to make the first AI film for the United Nations. And me, as well as a whole bunch of other students at Vanderbilt, kind of picked up the reins on that and really just accepted it without kind of understanding the logistical ends to it, and a lot of the technical ends to it. And spent about, I think, 6 or 7 months answering a lot of those questions of how do we make an AI film in the first place? How do we do this well and artistically imbued? How do we do it in a way that's not contributing to land degradation with how carbon and energy intensive a lot of these models tend to be? And so over the course of that, we ended up producing this project that we screened at COP16 back in September or back in December. And a lot of us really kind of approached it as a one-off project. And then we got to COP16, we kind of saw the need that a lot of these NGOs and United Nations kind of agencies and entities have for storytelling and for communications and the lack of resources and funding that's given to it. And we saw that as a big gap that this innovation, these AI tools can help fill. So that's when we formalized into a 501c3 Tomorrow in Focus. I've been working with a whole bunch of different entities. We've been having conversations with UNESCO, but actively in production with UNEP, with the World Food Program, as well as Special Olympics, which doesn't really relate as much to the kind of climate and SDG end of it. Trying to think of off the top of my head some of the other organizations we're working with. TerraCycle Global Foundation. Maybe more will come to me in a little bit, but we've had kind of a neat spread of different organizations. And since then as well, I started an internship with the G20 Global Land Initiative. Their big ambitious tagline is essentially, we need to reduce global land degradation by 50% by 2040. That is 15 years away, which seems like a massive undertaking, and it really is, but they've been having a lot of really kind of brilliant and innovative, I would say, programmatic work to bring that about. But happy to talk about all of it.
Super, super cool. And the idea of desertification and your internship with G20 Land Initiative and kind of we'd love to dive deeper in there because if anything relates extremely heavily with our SDG topic of choice this week. But before we do so, a little bit kind of going back to Project Green Thumb. Frank, I'd love to know a little more about how you see kind of AI or tech playing into the ecosystems or biomes and the bio side of things. How did you kind of think about that, or how did you come about? Yeah.
So plants are incredibly important in filtering our water as it goes into our aquifers in the ground and also runs off into rivers and oceans. One of the main pollutants in our waterways currently is nitrogen and then sediment as runoffs as a result of having eroded stream banks or farms without a riparian buffer right next to the streams. So one way to mitigate this is by planting riparian, what are called riparian buffers, which is basically a whole set of species that naturally grow right next to aquatic ecosystems such as lakes and rivers and the ocean that slow down the flow of water, allow it to percolate into the ground, and scrub it of pollutants that might be running off into them, which has a huge effect on aquatic life, such as fish and whatever you can find in the ocean. And as well as this, our technology can also be deployed for large scale projects on restoring forests or any ecosystem on land, prairies. We plan to implement the use of drone scanning technology so you can send out a drone over a huge area, make a 3D map, identify all the existing species, and then have the AI, which has access to a database of over 1 million species again, then select which species would be best suited for that area to restore it to its natural function.
Thank you for that. And yeah, the vast kind of reaching impact of technology, especially kind of given AI, the rapid and popular rise of AI and its gimmick. It's not only a gimmick, there's always a little bit of truth to it. And if without practicality, it wouldn't have been as big as it is today. And like we hear from your example here, it is very, very practical in the most real world sense out there. And the work that you guys are doing, kind of gathering a database, looking out into your project from the tech side of things. I'd love to bring Nate your insights into what were some of the challenges, or what were some of the better sides of things, in terms of technology when implementing it in the biosphere and gathering this data. What were some of the challenges? What were some of the easygoing sides that you guys have faced?
Yeah, sure. So there's many challenges of trying to build the world's biggest database for all these different species across all these different kingdoms. Really, the biggest one is trying to find reliable information, and that's really the big factor because a lot of stuff now online is not really good to use as a source, like just a general Google search. We can't really scrape the web with a general Google search. We have to pull research papers. We got to go back to literature that's being put out by universities and organizations that are trusted. And that's really the hard part is actually scraping these documents and actually getting reliable information. We've been working at doing this now for a year, and we're just finally figuring out how to actually publish this to our site because collecting this information is really extensive because we had to probably go through my guess is I don't know the exact numbers off my head, but it's around 1 million sources almost. And we have a team of people actually going around and peer reviewing our literature. And Frank is really the head lead on that. He's a very knowledgeable person. As you could see, you can ask him any question about this kind of information. He knows a lot about it. So he's going in and checking the information that I'm actually receiving from these trusted sources online, and he's going in and verifying again, putting in our database. So in our future too, we want to try to make the database that is the most reliable as possible and that is the most up to date to everybody's standards. Currently, there's an initiative being put out by iNaturalist that where you can actually go and basically take a picture of any species and the community will help identify it and tell you if it's endangered or whatnot in your particular area. We are working with actually them to actually get their pictures because it's open source and put it on our database as well. And we want to be the information complement to their side of things and try to create their community aspect that they have done very successfully over the last 20 years. And really, this checks and balances system that our system is really hard to make is trying to create a system where a regular user could go in and make an edit and send it to our team of moderators and then go to an approval process where Frank and our team moderators could like be, okay, this information is actually new information, it's valuable, let's do it up to date. And then the flip side of that is actually create again going in and denying information that is outdated that someone else thinks is correct. And that's really the biggest problem is we don't want to be saying the wrong information on our database. And just having that data integrity is huge because you could go on ChatGPT or Google Gemini or Claude and you could ask them all these questions that you're asking us and other people want to know about the particular landscape. But and they have access to the web too, sure. But th those answers are not going to be 100% correct all the time. And we really want to be the resource for that. And it's really difficult trying to, again, getting all this data, getting the approval process working, doing the database, because for each individual kingdom, I promise I won't ramble on too much longer. We have over like 200 data points, anything from like the plant width or like the fish width, um, what kind of conditions this particular species likes. For plants, it's, where they rather be mostly shaded or fully sun, etc. Like there's over 200 points that we have collected, and it's really extensive and has depth and breadth. Frank, I don't know if you want to touch on anything else I just said real quick before I hand it back off.
No, I think you stated that very well.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. And also, no, you're not taking up too much time. We have a pretty short panel and a lot of time to cover the depths of the projects that you're involved in. So absolutely appreciate the detailed outlook into some of the challenges that you faced. And it's very real in this age of information, or per se misinformation, that we live in. Vetting out what's right and wrong, it's increasingly difficult, especially with the rise of AI, which is a positive force, but however is being weaponized or can be weaponized at times, just like any other force or kind of innovation that comes about. Ben, I want to flip the question on you, kind of see and pick out some of the challenges that you faced, you/your team have faced, kind of incorporating or implementing technology, especially kind of AI, generative AI, into filmmaking. What were some of the challenges? And kind of tackling particularly climate change or desertification, looking at the carbon footprint that some of these AI models kind of are leaving behind. How are you guys looking into that? How are you guys improving some of the models to reduce the carbon footprint that's being left behind as you develop more and more films?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing that can be somewhat of a misconception, particularly within like AI video generation, at least in how we approach it, and I think anybody can approach it differently, but we try and view it mainly as a tool. It's not replacing regular filmmaking, it's not replacing a camera. It's a tool that helps the production of it, or is a different avenue in which we can go into content creation. And so I think one of the biggest hurdles that we approached was you have so much more control when you have a camera and a crew and a field, but you can, in a lot of ways, have so much less when you're using like Chat 4.0's image generation, or you're using Runway's video generation, or whatever it is. Although it's getting increasingly better with VEO3 and all the new models that are coming out. But I think one of the biggest problems that we've had is making sure that we're having absolute control, and that we're making sure we're telling and every aspect of it, and every visual, and every voiceover and every score aspect of each piece that we're putting out, that we're just telling the exact story that we want to be. Because in any case, the kind of end goal of what we're doing is storytelling, and it's communicating, and it's spreading awareness about problems or incredible achievements that are being made. It's less so about the AI itself. That's just a means to the end that we're using to make all this more accessible. And so to the end of the question, of the latter part of the question, then, of how are we doing something that's one of the most kind of carbon
One of the rare times this
aspect, or parts of AI in a space that's kind of focused on protecting the world and climate, and stopping land degradation. A lot of that has been focusing on what aspects of video generation, image generation are the most carbon and energy intensive. And a lot of that is when you're using, say, Google's VEO3, or using anything that OpenAI has out there. You're sending queries off into their data centers, and it's just that kind of process, and the way that a lot of these data centers are set up, not to get too deep into it, just generates a ton of energy requirements in order to fulfill those queries and send it back to your computer. However, if you're able to run a lot of those models locally on your computer, it's able to save a lot of that kind of energy and carbon intensity that you tend to see within data centers. And so a lot of what we've been setting up and what we use for that kind of big flagship project I mentioned in my spiel a little bit earlier, and what we've been doing up to this point for the most part with some caveats, is running a lot of these models that we've set up and workflows that we set up locally. And so a big way that we're doing that is through Comfy UI, which is a really popular kind of open source tool for local image as well as video generation, as well as some other kind of different kind of workflows that we've set up in a lower, how should I say, like RAM intensity or just GPU intensity to allow computers that like mine that are just a laptop to still be able to run them. And so then there's some nuance there of sacrifices, because the lower kind of intensity of these models, the lower the quality. So how do we then set up ways to still have character consistency, styles consistency, all of that stuff? But really just generally to answer your question, we see it as a big way to reduce the carbon and energy intensity of these is just to run them locally as opposed to using these cloud services that are out there right now. We also release carbon reports for each project that we have on our website that kind of delves into where the different energy intensities and carbon requirements or carbon intensities have been throughout. And so that's on our website as well.
Lovely. And a word that kind of catch or just stuck with me as I hear your sort of piece on carbon intensity in the different levels of production in AI generated videos is accessibility. When you say awareness, it really matters who you're tailoring your awareness content to. And I'm sure you guys have a lot of sort of regionally relevant and regional relevance and cultural context that goes into a lot of the films that that are being put out there for people to watch and view and be able to relate to a content that they can kind of then use in decision making and maybe go one more baby step greener than they were yesterday. And if it's the more relatable something is, the more meaningful and action could be derived from that content. So talk us through a little bit of some of the accessibility or cultural and regional relevance elements that you guys bring into your production setting.
Yeah, I love that. So the vast majority of content that's being produced right now, I don't think it's any surprise to anybody. It's by Western audiences for Western audiences, and so it's primarily English speaking, of course, and usually representing white European descent individuals. And so a big thing that we've been thinking about is how do we make content not just for more organizations like NGOs, UN entities, whatever it is, but more applicable to people, particularly those who are most at risk for land degradation, or in regions, I should say, that are most at risk for land degradation and climate crises and whatnot. And so the way that we thought about that with that kind of flagship with the UNCCD was speaking firstly, of course, with the UNCCD and identifying the particular programmatic work that they wanted to highlight, which happened to be one kind of program that was in Brazil, one in Senegal, one in the kind of outer provinces in China. And so we're making sure to kind of include those because, of course, they wanted us to include those, but particularly reaching out to individuals that are not just kind of conducting the programmatic work there, but individuals that are receiving it, and kind of doing a due diligence on that side. And I guess that's more of the filmmaking into it, but it's really wonderful to see the tools that are available right now on the AI side and the tech side to do, say, really high fidelity language translations to make it more so applicable for those audiences. And kind of tools like that just to make these productions hit a lot more home. So we're able to put subtitles on kind of, I can't recall the number of different languages, but making it super accessible for people to be able to access and consume this content, at least in that bare minimum aspect. Another example would be our work with the TerraCycle Global Foundation. They do a lot of river and plastic cleanup in Thailand. And so really what that looked like from, again, the filmmaking side is reaching out to these people. Like I'm sitting here in Maryland. I'm not going to be able to fly out there and kind of talk to these people directly, much less have that lived experience of what's going on there. So the best that we can do is making sure to, at the very least, reach out and have at length conversations and make sure we also have various rounds of back and forths to make sure that what we are producing, from a storyboard to a shot blocking to storyboarding to the kind of final product is consistent with their experience and consistent really with the story that they're trying to tell. And so then that is also, another example of being able to make these video productions accessible to Thai speakers in Thailand and all of that. But yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Not to kind of extend the spotlight on you, but I'd love to touch on one last topic before we move the floor over to the rest of the audience. I'd love to touch on a little more about like you mentioned, your recent experience or kind of opportunity that you've taken up with the G20 initiative, in particularly desertification and how that's going, and then because it pertains so well to the SDG of our discussion today, I'd love for you to speak on a little bit what your experience, what is it that the initiative does, and how it works.
Yeah, definitely. So funnily enough, it is a charter by the G20, but it's housed within the UNCCD, the UN branch that I worked within for that project I've been mentioning prior. And so it's kind of a weird thing where it's like they have their kind of decree from this select group of 20 countries, but they're representing, of course, the entire world. But yeah, their mandate really, and they'll put it on all materials, is reduce land degradation by 50% by 2040. I can't remember the particular UN or UNCCD COP conference in which they were started, but I want to say it was around 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, because that would make sense for the 20-year mark. But essentially, that's their goal. And so they do all this programmatic work really all over the world, but again, in particular regions of risk for land degradation. They've approached it in a pretty interesting way where they're very big on activating the private sector, activating kind of startup innovation, activating kind of the private sector to come in, tech innovations to come in a space in which like the UN has not always been super receptive to that. And I have my own mixed feelings on it, but I do think that any solution that's long term is going to have to activate the private sector, at least within the kind of current global order in which we're operating in. And so they've done a lot of really great stuff in kind of various countries and regions to activate entrepreneurs and give startup grants and everything like that for socially based and land degradation based startups that are focusing on that end. They obviously had a presence at COP16, and they kind of seek to be a big activator in spaces like that as well. But my particular role is within the communications department, which makes a lot of sense. And again, it's kind of within that same thesis of wanting these organizations that are impact-based to be utilizing these AI tools and tech tools a lot more than they already are. And so effectively, really what I'm working on right now is building out a toolkit to make sure that the other individuals and communications officers within the G20 Global Land Initiative are using these tools and are up to date, and can be able to put out more content and be able to put out more, I guess, optimized content for particular social media platforms or whatever the platform may be. Yeah, those are just some of the things that I'm working on and thinking about.
And you did mention kind of reaching the goal of preventing land degradation by a certain year,
2040.
40.
So
Okay, yeah. Yeah, just wanted to see some of the steps that are actually actively being worked on or taken or being strategized into taking in the future towards preventing land degradation and towards kind of reaching that SDG goal 15 on preventing or preserving life on land.
yeah,
What
that's
the steps that you've yeah.
so a big one again is I think it's called the Youth Ecopreneur Program. And so they have startup individuals from every continent in the world, all really focusing on kind of like regionally specific crises that they're facing. And so I believe there's one individual. I was fortunate to go out to one of their summits in Switzerland a couple months ago, and I was able to meet somebody there whose their startup is based in forget what particular province in China, but they use kind of bamboo, and bamboo is a renewable resource as a source of construction material. So their whole thesis is we are constructing so fast in East Asia generally, but of course in China, and the kind of sources and means of production materials is just not keeping up in a sustainable way with what we're doing. And so created this kind of ingenious way to use fibers from bamboo shoots and have them kind of turn into really strong and resilient construction material, which has kind of always just been a really interesting thing to me. That is a wonderful way to kind of incorporate a more sustainable and renewable kind of material and kind of innovation within that private space. Outside of that, though, the GLI, they partner with really big kind of initiatives and organizations that are pre-existing as well. And so they're one of the biggest supporters of the Great Green Wall in Africa. There's a incredible spread of desert southward in the Sahara Desert. And so the Great Green Wall Initiative is a collection of countries in sub-Saharan Africa that are really trying to set up trees and vegetation and other methods that are similar in that way to stop the spread of the desert south and kind of keep that as arable land. So that's another really big example. And I think kind of broadly in that way, the GLI kind of serves as a big resource hub for all these other existing initiatives that they're seeking to support, just kind of across the world and at very different levels of action.
Super, super cool. I kind of sense a level of synergy there with Project Green Thumb and even the GLI acting as almost a mediator between a lot of these initiatives that are at the grassroots level working towards the SDGs. And on that note, this was a great panel at today. Here we will open up the floor now to the rest of the audience for any questions, comments, or insights that you've gathered or we've gathered from our amazing panel here so far and the discussion that we've had at the very intersection of AI and land, as well as life on land, as well as life below water, and the particularly SDGs 14 and 15 pertaining to sustainability. We'll wait on a few of, I'm gonna open up the floor for any questions right here. Okay, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and shoot your questions while we wait for the questions to roll. Oh, it looks like we do have a couple. Without further ado, let's go ahead. Juan, go ahead. Please introduce yourself and your question. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Also, just as a, kind of like prior to me asking my question, I really appreciate you guys being here for the panel, Ricky for hosting it. But yeah, so my name's Juan, and I was just kind of curious. So, oh wait, can you guys hear me? Is everything good? I
Yeah.
think I might be lagging.
Oh, no, you sound perfect.
Uh,
I think your video might be a little bit, but we're able to hear you. Juan.
Oh, okay. My bad. You guys can hear me. Okay, everything froze for a minute. And I couldn't hear anything. So, um, well, I just wanted to ask you guys, so this is kind of just an open question, for any of the panelists. I was just curious. So, in terms of the SDG topics that we're touching on this week, I was curious if any of the projects and the work that you guys are doing, if any of that, because I know that, everything here is to promote kind of like the sustainability aspect of just life in general and all the technology that we're using moving forward. So I'm curious, do you guys see anything in the work that you're doing that you might need to look out for in the future? Like the potential negative impacts that could come about from the work that you guys are doing, and what kind of ideas do you guys have to potentially mitigate that?
I can go first. I assume many people in the call already know just how intense AI video production and image production is on the environment, on the world. And with models coming out right now, like Google's new VEO3, which is ridiculously impressive and also ridiculously high energy and carbon like tolls, it's something that I think a lot about. And it feels really kind of contradictory or paradoxical in many senses of using that technology in this space. And so I think a lot about how I can steer it in a better direction, lead conversations with that in mind, and then kind of in a space like where I am right now with the GLI, have that be a pretty renowned institution that can then set a positive precedent for usage of technology like that. But I'm certainly super concerned to see where it's going in the future. I think on one hand, these big tech titans, Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, you name it, they're kind of internally incentivized to lower the kind of compute toll of these models and make them more efficient from an energy and carbon side because it's just cheaper for them to run. And so I think there's a strong incentive on that side, but it's also they have a much stronger incentive, I would say, to have the highest quality outputs. And so those are definitely at odds. I have a huge hope that the energy tool and carbon tool will just start to shrink over time as our chip technology continues to get better, as our just kind of general hardware continues to get better. But that's a hope. And so I don't know if that's the best thing to rely on necessarily. And so I'm trying to figure out then with the idea and I guess the notion that these tools are going to continue to be used. I tend to view them as somewhat of a tidal wave that can't be stopped at this point. How can I steer them in the best direction possible? So it's certainly still a dilemma that I'm trying to figure out, but I hope that answers your question.
I mean, I could add on to that as well. We're trying to mitigate that actual concepts ourselves in our own startup here. So the biggest kind of caveat, again, like you mentioned, was that these AI models take a lot of power to run. So what we're doing right now is hosting our actual servers on our own terms, and we are choosing an Apple Silicon chip, which is about anywhere from 3 to 9 times more efficient than the leading chips being put out by anybody. And for our language model, we are choosing Google Gemini as well because they're the most efficient with the highest basically level of reasoning and information relationship between our database. But I'll just touch on Apple Silicon a little bit. It's to get the same amount of compute power that maybe OpenAI and Google and all these other tech giants would need, they might need like 900 watts. On our case, we only need probably 75 watts of energy, which is equivalent of a 10x decrease of amount of energy. And we're really trying to keep this in mind going forward for our own company, trying to lower the costs for our own sake, but also trying to keep the environment in our minds as well at all times. And that's really the biggest thing that I was trying to harp on to Frank because we could go cloud computing and really go taking that easier route, but at the same time, those data centers, those servers, they're really destroying ecosystems bad. They pollute the water, they make the water all dirty. I'm not trying to sound all doomsday, but you could find videos online. They're trying to put one in my neighborhood actually 30 minutes down the road, and the light pollution that puts off, the watershed, it really destroys ecosystem because these things are the one they quote down is 2.3 million square feet, which is it's a big facility. And then Frank could touch on a little bit too about like actually playing like invasive species as well, because that could actually do more harm to the environment than good as well. Frank, if you want to touch on that just real quick.
Yeah, I think you hit that point well earlier about how it's important that we're getting information from trusted sources and vetting it, because potentially if we had errant information, we could be promoting invasive species and having people plant them thinking that they're doing good for the environment when in fact they're doing bad. And that can have a rebound effect on them telling their friends and family about this species and then them going out and planting the same thing. We aim obviously to mitigate the amount of invasive species with our technology because in a lot of areas, invasive species are already at a threshold where the ecosystem function is diminishing because there's not enough native vegetation to keep them going.
Super, and it's definitely a very interesting kind of take on the idea of invasive species with the introduction of invasive infrastructure in local communities in a sense, right? So thank you so much for almost like a personal anecdote to the story where a lot of us can kind of or at least some of us, hopefully not a lot of us can relate. I live in Virginia, and about an hour to 30 minutes out, there's data centers left, right, and center. Microsoft just bought over 100 something acres of land to just put on their new data centers for Azure and various other sort of stuff. They actually bought out a military base that, well, a former military base out directly from the US government and put out a federal data center out there, whatever else they're doing. So, yeah, not the most optimal outcome for communities living super, super close over there. So, very interesting kind of anecdote right there. Nate and Frank, thank you so much for that. Brooke, I see you have a question. Please feel free to introduce yourself, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rakib. Just want to say thank you so much to the panelists. I'm learning a lot. Building a great mental model of SDG 10, I mean, sorry, 14 and 15. Yeah, just also wanted to play on, well, my question and what I want to talk about plays on what we were previously just talking about, the topic of, adding invasive species. Yeah, I was kind of wondering, with the technology that you guys are working at Green Thumb, Project Green Thumb, do you think it's possible to somewhat maybe safely try to remove certain species from ecosystems, for the sake of betterment, maybe even sake for of negative effects towards other people? But I was focusing on like, maybe mosquitoes being removed for like when there's a Zika virus kind of being spread around, specifically through mosquitoes, maybe having that them removed in a safe way, because I do understand though that trying to remove certain species or predators or prey from an ecosystem can be it can like tip the balances to extreme amount. But having AI kind of implement that proper terraforming, or how did I say, ecoforming of ecosystem, maybe that would be something that's also possible, because I know you guys talk about terraforming, but maybe having the whole scale of ecosystems be able to change based on what we need as humans.
Yeah, so I think that having all this data connected to an AI model would allow us to generate designs that not only promote the right species, but can also mitigate some of the nuisance species and dangerous species to humans. Potentially, once we get our model up and running and are doing large scale reforestation projects, we would have the data and computing power to model how that would progress into the future, and maybe be able to mitigate some of the negative effects of, say, mosquitoes, or make sure that if they're performing a role in the ecosystem, they are away from human settlements.
Hope that answers your question.
I'm not sure if you wanted to expand on that.
I mean, I was just kind of, throwing that up there because I know you guys are talking about like landscaping and, ecosystem mapping, but I was kind of like thinking of how that could probably, affect certain ecosystems and for a better whole of an ecosystem in certain areas. I guess I also wanted to go a little further and, that this, technology also has the ability, maybe, I don't know, if this is something that you guys see as a possibility that, this with this mapping out of, ecosystems, that maybe it could also further into advising how certain activities are done, like when it comes to, hunting, when it comes to, fishing, how to properly, where certain species it's better to fish, and where they're a little more, sensitive and vulnerable, that could tip the balances. I think that was really, really interesting to, maybe hear your considerations and part of that.
Yeah, that's incredible information you just gave us, because it's kind of Frank didn't really touch on it, but we're building up from the ground up. So right now we're trying to provide these articles and these educational resources on our site, on our database, with the plant itself, and give you like, because right now we have an AI that could actually go in and basically design a space that we're internally testing, and it will give you directions on how to basically terraform your property, right? Get rid of like the invasive species, as Frank mentioned, and how to do that as well. But then when we get actually enough data, we could actually basically create like kind of like an ecosystem region, I would call it, or like a map of an area, like a hunting region with you know, where there's water and there's a forest and whatnot, and we could actually intelligently predict on, you know, how many deer you can hunt in that area to basically, you know, get not to go below the carrying capacity of that population. And how many fish of this type you can actually fish so you don't go below that carrying capacity. Because if you go below that carrying capacity, you could really make the species really endangered or extinct. But the problem that we're facing right now is actually trying to find this data because there's not really there's some data out there, but there's not really a lot of data. And the funny thing is too is the data changes every day and it changes rapidly too. For example, for just a, you know, a homeowner case when we're trying to design a backyard, we need to treat every single landscape like it's bad invasive plants because 90% of the time or above, that dirt was brought in. It usually has invasive microorganisms in it. You get your Japanese knotweed, which will basically almost be impossible to get rid of. I have it in my yard, I've been fighting it out for years now, and it's a hard thing to get rid of, but you gotta treat every space like it's invasive just for the homeowner's sake. I'm just trying to give an example on that. And we try to provide directions to try to mitigate, you know, the soil that's being brought in from all these different regions that's invasive. Going back to AI models, yeah, when we actually have a you know, a good work kind of project station, we have kind of we have three different or four different products that we're really offering at this time, and one of them is like a project manager, which you could go in with your team of members, put like tasks in. So if you need to actually, you know, re you know, for trout season, if you need to restock the river at this certain date, you could say restock section A, B, and C, and then give it to this certain amount of people, keep the inventory and amount of, you know, different fish are in there, animals are in there, and it'll actually tell you what different plants are in that region if you scan that section with our AI and you actually have that really up to date. But again, right now we can only use this tool internally and use it with experts that know the different plants because we don't want to be, you know, citing that this plant is okay, it's good for the environment, but it's an invasive plant at the same time. I hope I answered your question there. Please, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with all the data that we're gathering and have access to, it we'll be able to create a sustainable system because it will eliminate an incredible amount of man hours required to do all the calculations and study and survey what's there. So it'll really expedite people's jobs, say at the Forest Service or ecosystem restoration organizations, and will allow them to do a lot more a lot quicker. And with the yards are an incredible opportunity because they're kind of a blank slate. A lot of them have a ton of invasive species, as Nate said, and we want to be able to best teach the homeowner how to make their yard sustainable by mitigating the effects of invasive species and incorporating species that will help make their yard an ecosystem paradise over time.
Thank you, Frank and Nate. Just kind of reiterating, this almost sounds like the allusion to AI-driven simulations in a sense, where having a comprehensive database of this sort will allow you to make those simulations only more correctly and make predictions and decision making more accurate based off of the data that you are able to provide into those simulations or these hypotheticals that AI may be able to evaluate later down. And thank you so much. And for the sake of time, we'll just keep the last question short. We have one last question from Pauline. Please go ahead and introduce yourself, and the floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Pauline. Thank you for all you've been talking about. But like in all like these meetings like I've attended, it's all like been like we've been talking about AI, but like I've been thinking about it. Like since we're like this age, I think like our parents like or like our ancestors usually know more than we do sometimes. But like since some of us like come from different regions and like we're like moving into different countries speaking different languages, it's hard for us to like it's hard for them to like go to AI and communicate or like understand what's there. And like in most cases like they really know like more than we know. They can tell us like this is where this is, and like they know different places we don't know. And like they can be like a very useful resource for certain information. And like it's like the problem is the language barrier. It's like AI has like actually so like it's like much advanced English, more than like they know. They speak a little English, but it's way like when they like go to AI, it's like way more complicated than it can understand. And like if they're like giving information, it's gonna be hard for them to give it, because like if they read and they're like invasive species, they're gonna be like, what's that? Like I'm not gonna be there like every time to talk to them to tell them like this is this. And remember, they don't really like using like the internet phones. They're not like as so addicted to phones. They are not gonna be like this is this, this is this. Like they're gonna just leave it and be like, I don't want things that disturb me. But if it was like easy for them to identify the things that you'll be like investor species, and it's like, oh my god, this and this, I know it, it's just right there. This and this, this and this. So I was just talking about like language barrier.
I would actually personally love to touch on a little bit of what you said, Pauline. Thank you so much for bringing in such a cool kind of insight, not very particular to our SDG 14 or 15, but very particular to the SDGs as a whole. And I'd like to give a little bit of a almost a personal anecdote, even just from the UNA USA or the UN Foundation side of things. Here in DC last year, we had multiple panels actually at the Leadership Summit in Washington that focused on intergenerational inclusivity. And that's something that was very, very overlooked in recent times, especially with the rise of sort of everything being very youth focused, which is incredible for us, of course. And if anything, just grateful for the opportunities that are being developed out there and put out there for people like ourselves, but people like our parents who, like you mentioned, do possess a vast array of knowledge and sort of an ocean of just their breadth of knowledge and lived experience, something that you cannot learn from books whatsoever, is on the verge of extinction, for lack of a better word, because of the sheer digitization that we are going through in this modern day. They are perhaps more used to going to the library for books, if they are to refer to any form of knowledge. However, we are kind of at our fingertips is how we access knowledge. But these accessibility channels are very, very different for the both of us, demographics who possess a vast array of knowledge, and losing either one would be a pretty great loss for the overall sort of academic field that's out there. And so to say, there are initiatives actually being taken in favor of intergenerational inclusivity, and that's something that's definitely should be in our minds. And like you mentioned, language accessibility is not only just the language itself, because once you translate something, jokes are something that's very, very difficult to translate because it carries a lot of regional and cultural relevance within them. And so yeah, so it's like Ben's sort of initiative working on incorporating regional relevance and cultural context by talking to people at a grassroots level and then incorporating them in a digital sphere is something that an incredible sort of movement, I feel like, as well as Frank and Nate kind of reaching the grassroots level people. That's ultimately kind of the solution that we should be looking at. It is sort of acting locally for a global impact, and that's kind of what USA kind of stands for. Um,
I got
uh,
I got something too I could touch on. So how we're really trying to channel the language barrier too here at Project Green Thumb is we're trying to find the best language models that are very good for multi-dialects. And the very big one is Google Gemini is very good at this. And another way we're actually trying to get our information, we actually have a bunch of Native American or native region uses for all these different plants because a lot of these plants were used for medicinal reasons, over 100 years ago, and we've kind of lost that touch to nature. And we have this data, and we want to offer this data to the community as well. But additionally, too, touching back on the language barrier, I found out putting icons that are, noticeable for everybody in every language that relate to, a length, maybe like a ruler for a length. That's how we're trying to mitigate the language barrier as well and to translate everything best we could. I just hope I can answer.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. On that note, we'll conclude our meeting here today. Thank you to our panel, Frank, Ben, and Nate for coming back as speakers. And thank you to all our audience members here for contributing. Thank you so much. And on that note, we conclude our meeting here today.
Thank you for having